All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final webinar in our planning and preparing for the 2025 Detroit AAG annual meeting. My name is Elin Thorland. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the AAG, and I'm pleased to welcome Joe Darden, who's giving our next webinar. Joe T. Darden is a Professor Emeritus in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences at Michigan State University. Go Green. He is a former Dean of Urban Affairs Programs from 1984 to 1997 and a former Fulbright Scholar at the Department of Geography, University of Toronto, 1997 to 1998. His research expertise covers residential segregation, racial discrimination in housing, racial inequalities, and immigration, particularly in the US and Michigan. He is the author of 9 books. 3 of the books are on Detroit. His most recent book is Detroit After Bankruptcy, Are There Trends Towards an Inclusive City? So thank you, Joe. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Ellen, for your nice introduction. I also want to thank Dr. Priscilla McCutcheons of the Department of Geography at the University of Kentucky and Dr. Latoya Eves of the Department of Geography and Sustainability at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. They invited me to present a keynote webinar on Detroit on behalf of the AAG Conference Steering Committee. I also want to thank the AAG Executive Director, Gary Langham, for accepting that recommendation. I welcome you to this webinar. We can begin. The purpose of my presentation today is to provide you with some information on the city of Detroit prior to your attendance at the annual meeting of the AAG. As many of you know, on July 18th, 2013, Kelvin Orr, the emergency manager appointed by Rick Snyder, Republican governor of Michigan, made a legal decision to declare the city of Detroit bankrupt. The argument for bankruptcy, according to Kelvin Orr, was that the population had declined, significantly declined, as many whites continued to leave the city, followed by more middle-class blacks, businesses, and industries. This was a result of disinvestment and a lack of employment in the city compared to opportunities in the suburbs. The city was deep in debt. Kelvin Orr actually governed the city until bankruptcy ended in Detroit on December 11th, 2014. I will focus on Detroit after bankruptcy to see whether all residents, regardless of race and the socioeconomic characteristics of their neighborhoods, received an equal, fair share of the benefits after the economic redevelopment of that city occurred after bankruptcy. Much of my presentation will be based on my recent book, Detroit After Bankruptcy, Are There Trends Towards an Inclusive City, published by Bristol University Press in 2023. After focusing briefly on economic redevelopment after bankruptcy, I will address the following objectives. Objective 1, to compare the extent of racial inequality between white residents and residents who were Black or Hispanic. 9 socioeconomic characteristic variables are used to best capture neighborhood characteristics. These variables are percentage of households below poverty, unemployment rate, median household income, occupational status, educational attainment, median value of dwelling, median rent of dwelling, percentage of households that own homes, and percentage of households with a vehicle available. Objective 2, to determine whether and where any gentrification occurred in Detroit after bankruptcy and whether race mattered in the gentrification process. Objective 3, to describe the largest Black and Hispanic businesses created before and after bankruptcy in the city of Detroit and the extent to which they participated in the economic redevelopment of Detroit. Objective 4, to describe the quality of the public schools in the city of Detroit and how the quality is related to the socioeconomic characteristics of neighborhoods, racial segregation, and academic achievement. And objective 5, to analyze crime incidents and crime rates in the city of Detroit in 2014 and in 2023, which allows any changes to be made in terms of crime incidents and crime rates after bankruptcy. Data sources were as follows. The United States Bureau of the Census American Community Survey 5-year estimates, 2016 to 2020, and 2019 to 2023, which was the most recent census available among the American Community Survey database. Crane's Detroit Business, the book 2025, which is the most recent book that they have on businesses in Detroit and Detroit suburbs in terms of those large enough to employ residents. The Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford University. Stanford University has data on every school in the United States in terms of its academic achievement. And the Stanford Educational Data Archive allows any researcher to assess those schools, compare them, contrast them in every city in the United States. The National Assessment of Educational Progress Report 2024, which is the most recent report available. The City of Detroit Open Data Portal 2025, the most recent data available there, crime incident data, and citydata.com 2025, crime rate in Detroit, Michigan. The methods used to analyze this data were the Darden-Camel Composite Socioeconomic Index and the Index of Dissimilarity. Details about these indices are presented in the Darden book 2023. Detroit's bankruptcy in terms of economic development left the city with numerous deteriorating and abandoned buildings, vacant lots, and very cheap land, which was an investor's dream, according to Davy and Walsh in 2014. Any developer would want this opportunity if they really, really wanted to. The governor returned the governance of Detroit to the elected city officials on December 14, 2014. Detroit's mayor was Mike Duggan. He's still mayor today. He was white, is white, and the 9-member city council majority Black. They were given the challenge of rebuilding the city by attracting investments in housing, rehabilitated housing, new apartments, and condos. They were also to ensure that long-term existing residents would not experience rent so high that they could not afford to remain in their neighborhoods. To redevelop the city, the developers, who were white male billionaires, wanted the city to give them the highest tax advantages, the highest subsidies, or they would not agree to redevelop the city. That is what they told the city council and the mayor at the beginning. Detroit's mayor and city council had to make the decisions regarding which redevelopment plans to approve. City residents pressured officials not to agree to the developers' plans unless a guaranteed number of affordable housing units were part of the deals. The city finally made deals with two white male billionaires early in the process. The white billionaire developers selected by the city for economic redevelopment were Dan Gilbert, owner of Quicken Loans, and the Elliott family. They had total investments of $5.6 billion. Blacks and Hispanics have been largely absent from the process of economic redevelopment of Detroit. Uneven economic redevelopment seems to have been the pattern. It has not been even in the city of Detroit. Significant attention has been paid to downtown Detroit compared to less redevelopment of neighborhoods. Table 1 on the next slide shows the most recent 5-year census data on population of Detroit by race for the period 2019 to 2023. As you can see, the total population of Detroit, 633,221. Among that total population, 75.8% Black or African American. The white population was 11.2%. Hispanics were 8%, and a very small Asian population of 1.6%. This is Detroit in a shaded area to separate it from the suburbs, which is in the white areas you can see, the city of Detroit. And the controversy between the city of Detroit and the suburbs indicates a very, very long history in terms of what happens to the city. There's always competition between the city and the suburbs of Detroit. Only 6% of Detroit's population were immigrants, one of the lowest percentages among large cities in the United States. This is lower than the national average, according to the most recent census. Unequal race and class inequality related to uneven economic redevelopment of neighborhoods. That's the section I need to talk about now. As indicated in my first objective, the neighborhoods of the population are best captured by the 9 socioeconomic characteristic variables, which are percentage of households below poverty, unemployment rate, median household income, occupational status, educational attainment, median value of dwelling, median rent of dwelling, percentage of households that own homes, and the percent of households with a vehicle available. Analyzing the population based on this, we find that the poverty rate was 34.7% for Blacks and 33.4% for non-Hispanic whites in the city of Detroit after bankruptcy. The poverty rate for Hispanic was 34.3%. There was a gap in the median household income. The median household income for Blacks was $30,062 and $32,754 for Hispanics, compared to $38,145 for non-Hispanic whites. Of the occupations held by Blacks in the city of Detroit, 21.8% were in the very high-rated occupations, which are professional and managerial occupation. These are top in terms of the occupational status in the city, compared to 35.7% of all non-Hispanic whites in Detroit. Notice the inequality in occupations from this data. Hispanics held only 10.6% of the high-rated occupations. In the important area of homeownership, only 45.8% of Black households own their homes, compared to 53.3% for non-Hispanic white households. Hispanics are almost equal whites in home ownership with 53.2%. Based on these variables, the census 5-year estimate data shows that extreme race inequality existed after bankruptcy in Detroit. The social and economic characteristics of neighborhoods in Detroit were influenced tremendously by the bankruptcy. Neighborhood residents were not only concerned about racial inequality, but they were also concerned about gentrification in their city, and whether it occurred, if it did, where did it occur, and was there a racial component to the gentrification? Did gentrification occur in Detroit? If so, where did it occur, and was there a racial component? That is an objective that I had to answer. I define gentrification as a neighborhood whose entire socioeconomic characteristics improved, moving the neighborhood from a very low or low socioeconomic characteristic neighborhood to a very high socioeconomic characteristic neighborhood. I go in detail on this in the book 2023. I use the Darden Composite Socioeconomic Index to determine whether any gentrification occurred and where it occurred in the city of Detroit. In order to determine if and where gentrification occurred, the 9 socioeconomic characteristic variables I've talked about already, and as I discussed previously, must change. They cannot remain as they were. I consider census tracts as surrogates for neighborhoods. This is consistent with William Julius Wilson's book on neighborhood concentrated poverty in the city of Chicago. Table 2 on the next slide shows the changes in the 9 socioeconomic characteristics of neighborhoods of gentrified census tracts. And figure 2 on the next slide will show where they were located. These are the variables, and every single one of them showed an increase in socioeconomic characteristics, every single one. And the next slide will show you in detail what that was. This is where it occurred. Most of the gentrification occurred in a downtown, close to the downtown central business district area. That's where it concentrated the most. And these are the changes that occurred. Everyone changed. Bachelor's degree holders increased from 12 to 18.3%. The percentage of unemployment residents decreased from 21% in 2011, 2015 to 6.8% 2016 to 2020. The percentage of professional and managerial workers increased from 10.7% to 19%. The median household income increased from $28,467 to $43,631. The median housing value increased from $79,350 to $129,475. The median gross rent increased from $833 to $989. The percentage below poverty decreased from 26% to 12%. The percentage of vehicle ownership increased from 50.7% to 54.8%. And the percent of homeowners increased from 44% to 48%. The change in the socioeconomic characteristics revealed that the entire neighborhood changed, which is consistent with my definition of what gentrification means. The increase in the social and economic mobility from very low and low socioeconomic characteristics to middle and high socioeconomic characteristics. I repeat in detail that the result is consistent with my definition of gentrification. The racial composition of census tract for 2011-2015 census data and 2016-20 data were examined. The results showed there was an increase in the non-Hispanic white population in the gentrification process. The total population of non-Hispanic whites who experienced gentrification was 4,414, an increase from before gentrification of 2,750. The total population of non-Hispanic blacks who experienced gentrification was 25,117, which was a decrease from 25,635. The analysis indicates that the total population for non-Hispanic whites increased in the gentrified tracts and blacks decreased. The Hispanic population also increased in gentrified tracts from 218 to 370. Blacks and Hispanics in Detroit, in terms of residents, were concerned about businesses with paid employees. I turn now to the findings that answer the question as to whether Black and Hispanic-owned businesses with paid employees increased after bankruptcy. The data on businesses with paid employees show that before and during bankruptcy, Black and Hispanic business owners were extremely underrepresented compared to their populations in the city of Detroit. Did that change after bankruptcy? Data from Crane's Detroit Business, which is the best source of data, the book 2025, which is the most recent data available, shows that after bankruptcy, the extreme underrepresentation of Blacks in construction had not changed. Blacks were also extremely underrepresented in large businesses with paid employees, regardless of the type of business. This is due to difficulty gaining access to capital to establish large businesses. The lack of access is due in part to systemic racial discrimination. This is expressed in more detail in the book Darden 2023. According to the same Crane's data book, only 7 of 14 of the largest Black-owned businesses were in the city of Detroit. Others were located in the Detroit suburbs. They range in revenue from $1.8 billion for Bridgewater Interiors and automotive seating type business to $154 million for MCL Jasco, an engineering services business. None of these businesses were founded after bankruptcy. Every one existed before bankruptcy. Hispanics were also underrepresented among large businesses with paid employees, like Black business owners. Hispanics were more likely to own smaller businesses and pay more for access to capital than the non-Hispanic white-owned businesses. Again, this was due in part to systemic racial discrimination, as indicated in detail in the book 2023 by Darden. Only 1 out of 4 Hispanic-owned businesses, the ideal group, was located in the city of Detroit. It is a steel and construction services business with revenue of $605 million in 2023. It was founded before bankruptcy, not after bankruptcy. Not a single Hispanic business with large employees were founded after bankruptcy. Prior to bankruptcy, many Black and Hispanic parents were extremely concerned about the quality of education received by students attending Detroit public schools. Blacks in Detroit have been concerned about education for years and years and years, and they were still concerned after bankruptcy. The question, after bankruptcy, is the quality of education received by Black and Hispanic students in Detroit equal to the quality of education received by white students? The data provided by the Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford University, led by Reardon and others in 2024, provided some answers about the extent of school segregation and the inequality of education received by Black and Hispanic students compared to white students. Again, I emphasize that the Educational Opportunity Project at Stanford University is the most detailed on every school in the United States. It has data on academic performance of those students by race, class, teachers, anything you wish to know about the education of the school, at the school, and the students. This database has that information. So, inequality received by Black and Hispanic students compared to white students, they had an answer to that question. The analysis of the evidence showed that Black and Hispanic students attending schools in Detroit were not receiving an equal education to white students at the elementary level and at higher grade levels. Thus, in terms of education of students in Detroit after bankruptcy, the city has not achieved a level of racial equity, equal opportunity, and inclusion. The race of students is still the dominant factor in educational inequality in the city of Detroit, and I will tell you it has been that way for a very, very long time, and it continues to be a major factor in terms of inequality. The academic achievement gap between Black and white students increases, not decrease, but increases from each grade level to the next higher grade level based on average test scores, which means that the longer Blacks and whites stay in school, the wider the gap becomes between them in terms of test scores. The Detroit School District is a district where test scores are lower than the US average, and test scores have been declining over time. Test scores decrease by an average of 0.09 grade levels each year from 2009 to 2018, according to Reardon and others in 2024 report. According to the most recent report of the National Assessment of Educational Progress by the National Center for Education Statistics, published in 2025, Detroit School District fourth graders saw some improvement in their math scores on a rigorous national exam. However, overall performance showed no significant gains in other categories. The Detroit School District remained where it has been since 2009. And where was that? At the bottom of other large school districts. Only 7% of the Detroit students were considered proficient or above in math in the fourth grade and in reading and math in the eighth grade, which are the two grades in which these tests are really delivered. According to the Stanford Project by Reardon and others, the average test scores are influenced by what? Home environment, early childhood experiences, community resources, and the schools themselves. The academic achievement gap is completely accounted for by the racial differences in what? School poverty and racial economic segregation, according to Reardon and others. Reardon and others also said that racial segregation is harmful. Why? Because it concentrates Black students and to a lesser extent Hispanic students in high poverty schools. High poverty schools are the schools with the lowest academic achievement wherever they exist. In addition, their schools are in neighborhoods where very low socioeconomic characteristics, with students experiencing family poverty. The schools also receive fewer resources from the state of Michigan. Schools in low poverty areas receive the least amount of resources. According to Darden Camel Composite Socioeconomic Index, these schools that are low in academic achievement are in neighborhoods characterized as very low or low in socioeconomic characteristics as defined by those variables that I mentioned earlier. Very few of the residents there would be homeowners compared to neighborhoods where many white students reside. Again, in detail in the Darden book. As indicated previously, white home ownership rate was 53.3% compared to the Black home ownership rate of 45.8%. Many residents own their homes in high socioeconomic areas and neighborhoods, and these are the places where more white students attend school. The highest quality public schools are located in those neighborhoods with the highest rate of home ownership and the highest value of housing. Such schools also receive the highest amount of resources from the state of Michigan. Residents in Detroit are very concerned about types of crime, violent crimes. And these crimes are what? Murders. They are most concerned about robberies, most concerned about burglaries, most concerned about. Table 3, which I will show shortly, indicates that crime incidents and crime rates in each type of violent crime did not increase, but declined from 2014 and 2023. This is based on the data from citydata.com, crime rate in Detroit, Michigan. Crime rate figure is per 100,000 people. This table shows you the rates and it shows you the incidents for each of these very violent crime, and the residents of Detroit are most concerned about. These are the 3 types that they are most concerned about when it comes to the question, I want to be safe. Safe from what? Murders, robberies, burglaries. And in every one of these, from 2014 to 2023, showed a decrease in each of them that they were most concerned about. Murders, for example. The incidents were 298 in 2014 and went down to 250 in 2023. The rate of murders decreased from 43.5 to 40.6. Robberies, which are concerned about, in the same period, the incidence of robberies decreased from 3,573 to 1,388. The rate of robberies decreased from 521.8 to 225.5. Burglaries, which they're concerned about, were incidents at 9,179 in 2014, but decreased to 4,659 in 2023. The rate of burglaries decreased from 1,341 to 756.9. When crimes are broken down by crime type, it shows, the evidence shows very clearly that crime incidents after bankruptcy decreased in the city of Detroit. That's what the data will show. Then if you look at where they were occurring more, they still were occurring more in very low and low socioeconomic characteristics neighborhood, but all types of neighborhoods experienced a decrease in crime rates in the city of Detroit. Fewer in the middle-class neighborhoods and high and very high socioeconomic characteristics neighborhood. Again, this goes into more detail in the book. Conclusions in terms of racial inequality and 9 socioeconomic characteristic variables. These are important. Based on the analysis of the most recent comprehensive data on racial inequality and the socioeconomic data on neighborhood socioeconomic characteristics, in bold, I state, the problem of race and class inequality has remained as severe in Detroit after bankruptcy as before. On gentrification, the analysis of gentrification indicates that the total population of non-Hispanic whites and Hispanics increased in gentrified tracts, while Blacks decreased. Thus, gentrification benefited whites more than Blacks. Conclusions related to Black and Hispanic owned businesses. Large Black and Hispanic owned businesses with paid employees were extremely underrepresented before bankruptcy, and they were extremely underrepresented after bankruptcy. No large Black and Hispanic owned business occurred after bankruptcy. Black and Hispanic owned businesses were not equally involved in the socio-economic redevelopment of the city of Detroit. Conclusions related to education. After bankruptcy, the academic achievement gap between Black and white students continued to increase from each grade level to the next higher grade level based on average test scores. The city of Detroit and the state of Michigan have failed to provide Black and Hispanic students with an equal education, And I must say that this has been something that Blacks have been experiencing ever since Brown versus Board of Education did not follow a solution for them. Conclusions related to violent crimes. Overall, violent crime incidents and crime rates decreased in most neighborhoods in the city of Detroit between 2014 and 2023. This is one area that many of the politicians like to point out. Crime decrease, not increase. Final conclusions. Black and Hispanic residents of the city of Detroit did not become more equal to white residents. The city of Detroit did not become more inclusive in terms of equal opportunity. These are my references that supports my presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I welcome any questions at this time. I provided you with my email address in case you don't have a question now, may have one in the future. Please contact me. I'll try and answer whatever questions you might have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. We do have a question. So Martha Dowsley asks, are those murder rates similar in other large US cities? Here in Canada, it is below 10 out of 100,000 people.
The rates in most American cities have been going down. They've been decreasing everywhere. Very few places experience increases. They've been decreasing throughout the United States in cities. So this is not somewhere Detroit is unique in this regard. But since before bankruptcy, Detroit stood out as one of the most, terrible place to live because the crime rates were so bad. But Detroit can say, we're declining in terms of that. You can see the rate of decline. It's something that they talk about a lot. The politicians do, and they are correct to say that the crime rates have been decreasing and they are at a lower level after bankruptcy than they were before. So if one wanted to pick out some indicator and say, can we cite anything that has changed in Detroit after bankruptcy that one can say that's a positive thing? Violent crime rates would be one of those you could put out.
Wonderful. Andrew asks, what effect was the declaration of bankruptcy expected to have on socioeconomic characteristics of Detroit?
Well, bankruptcy came in as a way to settle the problem of debt because Detroit was in so much debt prior to bankruptcy, and it could not handle those debts without some kind of intervention, which is why the governor of the state of Michigan issued the legal decision to declare bankruptcy in Detroit. It was not the Detroit residents, in fact. They had not agreed to do that. But the governor of the state of Michigan said that the only way Detroit can get out of this debt is to allow the city to be bankrupt. And that's what it did at that time. So in a sense, what the bankruptcy did was allow the city to turn around and move towards improvement as opposed to a continual decline of the city. Had it not happened, the deterioration that was occurring would have continued to exist. So the bankruptcy stopped it. They were able to get more money from other places. The state of Michigan provided some, and there were other places where they got some to turn that around. And so-called grand bargain, in which they agreed to negotiate a process in which they would not be able to continue to be in debt, to pay the debts off, is what they did. So in that sense, the bankruptcy stopped that decline, turned it around, and allowed it to start coming back the other way.
All right, we have another question from Eva. Can you talk about the city council and mayor dynamics? If the council is 100% Black, how are Black interests being eclipsed? Oh, how are Black interests being eclipsed?
Very good question. Very interesting because this mayor, even though, and I followed his his administration. Even though he is white, he had been able to compete with the blacks who ran against him, in fact, when he first became elected mayor and re-elected, but he was able to demonstrate his effectiveness much beyond the fact that color mattered. And he's been able to do that the whole time he's been mayor. He's worked well with the black population. When he made presentations like his city of the city address, in fact, if you didn't turn around and look at his color, you wouldn't know whether he was white or black, because he understood the situation so well that he spoke like a black person, even though he's white. And so he has been very effective in doing that. And there hasn't been that much conflict between him and the city council, even though it's majority black. That's because he was able to relate very well. He was born in Detroit himself, so he knew the city very well, even though he moved out to the suburbs and came back to run it. So he was a very unusual, I think, person to run as mayor, and he won, and he's been very effective. He's not going to be running again, by the way. The other candidates are getting ready to run now, and there's several of them who's going to be running for mayor. The president of the city council, Mary Sheffield, is no doubt leading. She's been very effective as a city council president. She may end up being the first woman mayor of the city of Detroit if she wins. And as I said before, she has been very effective as city council president.
All right, a follow-up question from Andrew. Was there an expectation that the bankruptcy declaration and increased investments would improve the socioeconomic characteristics of predominantly Black neighborhoods in Detroit?
Very good question. And yes, the answer to that question would be yes. The residents thought that would be the case. And in fact, they insisted upon that. When the developers wanted to do something, they always would say to him, there has to be these benefit agreements in which the neighborhoods must benefit, because the developers, to be honest about it, even though they may be capitalists, they would not agree to develop unless they got so much money from the city taxpayers or city subsidies from the state of Michigan or somewhere. They did not act just like capitalists by going in, taking a risk, taking a chance. They insisted up front, in order for us to do this, we have to have from you the largest tax advantage we can get. And that's what they put on the city residents of Detroit. And the city residents of Detroit had to agree to it. Otherwise, they would not agree to start the redevelopment. But the residents did expect their situation to improve. That's why they agreed to spend so much money from their tax dollars in order to hire these developers and make sure they do it. One problem they had was that the developers preferred to do their investment downtown to a greater extent than the neighborhoods where these residents lived. And so the residents have always complained that they were not getting enough from these developers, and the city should not have agreed to all of their plans to do that, because disproportionately the redevelopment occurred downtown. And that's been the problem throughout the whole process after bankruptcy.
Mariana asks, well, first she says, thank you so much for this lecture. Could you please comment on the causes for crime rate decrease? Thank you.
Yeah, very good point. And the evidence comes from the police department and the city council, really. This, from their perspective, I have to say from their perspective, because they say that the crime rates dropped because they interacted more with the neighborhoods in Detroit. This was not something where they went in and started arresting people and so forth. They think the key answer to reducing the crime rate was the city council, city government, police force, and others all agreed to interact more with the residents in the city. With the residents in the city cooperating with them, they were better able to identify those who may have been committing the crimes, to prevent them when they happen, as opposed to what happened before, where you had a very lack of interaction on a positive state between the city, police officers, and the residents. If it's a cordial relationship, cooperative agreement, the crime rates drop. When it's not that way, the crime rates don't drop. And that's what the Detroit residents say. That's what the Detroit police say. And that's what the Detroit City Council say, is that they brought it down through cooperation between the city police officers and the city residents.
June asks, since the bankruptcy, has the tax base and revenue, property tax specifically, been improved, perhaps due to gentrification?
The tax is still, and from the residents' perspective, the tax is still too high. But having said that, the situation has improved because in some areas, housing has been built when it would not have been built otherwise, so the taxes have been there as well. But the tax rates did help because it went up every time, but the housing development indicated that there were condos, apartments that did not exist before bankruptcy. So the home, in terms of provided homes for people, did occur. And so that has brought about some improvement. But again, it's not enough. There's still a homeless problem. Home ownership rates are still not as high as they should be. Keep in mind, the statistics show that most Blacks in the city of Detroit do not own their homes. Home ownership is so important that to extend your wealth from one generation to the next, you need to be a homeowner. A key problem in Detroit, other predominantly Black cities, home ownership is not as high as it should be. So the situation is better, but it could be improved even more.
All right, and our next question, and we have some thank yous for the answering of the questions. Next question, when you say that the mayor has been, quote, very effective, end quote, how do you measure, quote, effective, end quote? Your data indicate that little or no change has occurred in the economic and educational status of Black residents, and that downtown investment has been emphasized more than investment in low-income Black neighborhoods.
That's true what you are saying, but if you look at it in terms of what he could do based on his power to do it, and what some mayors don't do based on their power to do it, and the city council, they've been able to do things that could not occur without it. What the mayor did and continues to do is get these developers to agree to a plan of action when it comes to the city of Detroit. And he's done that by working with the neighborhood to express what they want, not just what he wants, but he would get ideas from the neighborhoods. He would go to these developers and say, look, this is what you need to do in order to improve the situation. So he's been able to do that effective enough because the people of Detroit needed that in order to make sure things happen. So what he's done mostly is been a negotiator between these billionaire developers and the predominantly Black residents. He's done that effective because he's tried to make sure that they did get some benefits. Again, not completely as they would like, but he has been able to do it, meaning that he has not played the role of a spokesperson for these billionaires. He has been a spokesperson in part for the residents, and I would consider him a negotiator between these residents and these billionaire developers to do the best for the city that he could do based on his power as mayor to do it. Now, the city council and the mayor didn't always agree on everything, but most things they were able to agree on and keep things moving ahead.
All right, well, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Darden, for your webinar today, and thank you all for participating in our preparing for the 2025 Detroit annual meeting. The recording will be available on our website soon, so we look forward to you watching that, and we look forward to seeing you all in Detroit in a few weeks.
I will too. Thank you for your participation. Appreciate it.